Share live, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Monica. So good afternoon, everybody, and I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting. Members, you are by now aware of your need to keep your video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphones muted, except when I invite you to speak. Although just prior to the meeting, I noted that some members are having problems with connection, so if you have to turn your camera off to increase the bandwidth, then please do so. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I would declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such a time as it can be reconvened. Can I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and these recordings will be published on the Council's website. Moving to attendance, I'll begin by calling the names of all the members of the committee to establish your attendance and confirm that you can hear me and that we can hear you. So beginning with Councillor David Ambrose-Smith.
Present, Chair, I can hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Barbara Ashwood.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Nicola Harrison. Councillor Harrison has joined us yet. Councillor Harrison will be able to join us shortly. Councillor Peter.
I can't hear you, Josh.
Present, Chair, and I can hear you.
Present. Thank you. Councillor Linda Jones.
Oh, sorry, did you get that? Present.
We appear to be having some terrible connection issues, including myself.
Chairman, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I can't hear anything.
I'll see if that makes any difference. Members, I'll continue the list and hopefully we'll be able to get through it. Councillor Maguire.
Present, I can hear you now. Thank you.
That seems to be working. Thank you. And myself, Councillor Josh Schumann. We'll now move on to today's agenda.
Chair, did you hear me, Hunt? Did you hear me?
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. I can hear you, so
Okay.
I'll mark you as present too. Thank you. So we move on to today's council agenda, and we start with apologies for absence and declarations of interests. Would the Democratic Services Officer please report any apologies for absence?
We have not received any. Sorry, Monica.
Thank you. We now move on to declaration of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare on the agenda items we're considering today? I see no raised hands. So we move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of February 2021. We're being asked to approve these minutes of the meeting on the 4th of February as a correct record. Can I ask members who do not agree with this to please use the raised hand function now? Flicking between screens as well. Thank you. I have no raised hands. So on that basis, members, I'll take it that members are happy that the minutes are a correct record, and I will, when I'm able to, sign those as a true record when I return to the office. We now move on to agenda item 3, and this is the Senior Manager Pay Data and Pay Policy Statement 2021-2022. Before I invite the HR Business Manager, Lindsay Fulcher, to introduce the report, members, you should have had an addition to Appendix 1, the total remuneration for January-December 2020 in £5,000 bands, except for the total remuneration of £150,000 and above, which was circulated separately last week and published on the Council's website. Lindsay, please introduce the report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
So presented to you today is the Senior Manager Pay Data and accompanying Chief Officer Pay Policy Statement. Publication of these two documents is to fulfil the requirements of the Local Government Transparency Act as well as the Localism Act. If I can start by please drawing your attention to the appendices in Appendix 1, you will see that there are 4 posts that we have listed that exceed the £150,000 salary range. They are the Chief Executive of the Greater Cambridge Partnership, the Executive Directors for People and Communities and Place and Economy. What I would like to say is all 4 of these roles are only partly funded by Cambridgeshire County Council. You'll be aware that the Chief Executive of Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership is the majority of that role is externally funded. We host it as the GCP is not an employer in their own right. And the other 3 posts are part funded. But for purposes of transparency, we list them on this report here. Moving down the report, you'll see that we've got 35 posts in Tier 1 to 3. This compares with 29 last year. And of the 35, 19 of those are shared with Peterborough. The increase of 6 posts this year, we've looked into this, and the reason for those is they are either now posts that are reporting into heads of service roles that are currently vacant. So temporarily by default, they report into the line manager above, usually an assistant director. And there are a couple of posts there that were repatriated from the LGSS shared service arrangement late last year, which now appear fully in our structure under different line managers. You'll see in 3.4 that we've got 156 officers where their total earnings exceed £50,000. This is an increase in 27 from last year, which seems a lot. So I've done a little bit of work at looking at the reasons behind those and why that's increased. We do see, you'll remember from last year's report, we do see a year-on-year increase in the number of posts in this bracket. And the reason being is obviously we have an annual cost of living. Our pay scales get inflated every year in line with local and national pay increases, but that 50k threshold hasn't changed for quite some time. So we do see a year-on-year increase. However, another factor for the increase this year is that due to the COVID situation, we have extended the number of posts that can claim overtime in our organisation. So there will be some people in posts that wouldn't normally hit this £50,000 mark, but because of receiving extra payments and overtime payments are now in that. The thing to remember with that is that £50,000, it isn't salary, it's total remuneration. So things like overtime will be included in there. Moving to sections 3.3 and 3.7, which look at our median and mean salary. You'll see that our median, which is our median, is £27,000. Last year, the average decreasing slightly, currently 29,463. And again, looking into this in a little more detail as to why our mean has decreased, what I have been able to identify is that we've got an increase in posts at grade 3 and grade 6 in our organisation, which are below the median value. So some of those roles, if you think about the kinds of levels of those roles, some of them may be reablement workers, some of them may be business support officers, and they would be roles that would sit under that median and therefore are pulling down our mean slightly. And the final thing I wanted to draw your attention to today is the salary ratio. This is something that we have to publish underneath these regulations. Our salary ratio is currently 1 to 6. Historically, we have had a target written down in here, or the Hutton report certainly stressed that the target was a ratio of no greater than 1 to 20. However, in recent years, this has been challenged nationally and seen as a target, whereas a lot of councils are already underneath that, and therefore it's recommended that we no longer publish this. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this because you may remember seeing the 1 to 20 ratio in previous reports. That's all I had to summarise to you today, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsay. If I may, from the chair, just start with a question, and I don't know whether the answer to this is easy to find, but you correctly highlighted that the top paid members of staff are shared positions. So if we were to go to a cost which was entirely paid by Cambridgeshire, the ratio will be a lesser ratio because obviously 50% of that cost is shared with another authority. Is that correct?
That is right. To be honest, it probably wouldn't significantly decrease it, but it certainly would influence it, yes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bill Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. In 3.2, when we're talking about the Rachel Stoppard, could I ask who the partner authorities are? I've got a feeling it was Cambridge City, South Cambs, but I don't know. Can you tell me who the partner authorities are?
Yes, that is a post that's shared with districts. I think it's South Cambs, City. I think there may be another in there. I'd have to check that for you, I'm afraid.
I'd like to know if East Cambs make any contribution whatsoever to that. I would hope they wouldn't, and I don't believe they do. I thought it was called the City Deal, and I think it was South Cambs and Cambridge City. That was my understanding. Am I right with that? I am. Okay, thank you. How much of this salary comes from central government? It says that the majority of the Greater Cambridge Partnership funding, does it come particularly to fund this post, or is it just sort of comes as a large grant and then the wages come out of it?
I'm happy to find that out for you and circulate after the meeting. I can find out what the breakdown is in terms of the funding and circulate that to committee afterwards, if that's okay.
Okay, you've answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I think it would be helpful when doing that if also you could highlight if there is any contribution from Cambridgeshire County Council towards that post. And if so, at what level do we contribute towards it, or whether it's self-funded, as Councillor Hunt correctly asked. Thank you. Members, any other questions on our pay policies? Oh, sorry, yes, Councillor Jones I have next. Thank you. Councillor Jones, you're muted still, sorry.
I think I came at this point last year and that issue was raised last year. And I think the response, if I recall, was that it was wholly externally funded. So unless it's changed, I think that's the answer that Councillor Hunt probably wants. I have a different question really, which is probably just an issue about not having been on the committee for very long. But I was sort of looking at the 50-50 shares, and obviously they're quite high salaries right through a significant swathe of Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough County Council. These salaries which are shared 50-50. And I wondered if somewhere there was a rationale for that, because obviously the Shire, Cambridgeshire, is about 3 times the size of Peterborough. And so on the face of it, the logic of having 50-50 splits is sort of, interesting. And I just wondered, I'm sure there is a rationale for that. And it may well be that, people are very much aware of it and there's a culture of what time you spend on one and what time you spend on the other. But in terms of the complexity of issues in Cambridgeshire, it is sort of, in a way, surprising. So I'd be interested in any comments on that, which might be, of course, from the councillors rather than from Lindsay.
Thank you. I think actually Janet might be able to provide some context, because there is, as part of this, originally we obviously entered into a shared agreement through the chief executive, and then more posts were considered and added over time. But what became necessary was a principal agreement that we would have with Peterborough about the shared costs and the shared mechanism. And perhaps Janet could just either allude to that or maybe circulate that to members, particularly obviously Councillor Jones, so you understand what agreement is in place. Thank you. Janet, did you want to?
Yes, just to add to that, you're absolutely right in what you've just said, Councillor Schumann, and the basic principle is that in all the leadership posts, we do have a 50-50 split. Below the leadership posts, there is a very clear process in place. So every agreement we venture into for a shared service or a shared post, that goes to what we call a shared services governance board, which I sit on, and has representatives also from finance in both authorities. And a rationale goes forward as to what the split will be, depending on the nature of the role and the amount of time that will be spent. So it's not always 50-50. More often than not, it'll be 66-33 or there or thereabouts, some 70-30. It depends very much on the post. And that goes through a very strict process and is captured and held by finance, so that we make sure that all posts are appropriately costed and paid for during the year. So there is a process in place. That's the point. Most of the leadership posts are considered 50-50 because it's felt that in those sorts of roles, it's more difficult to divide your time. You probably are conducting a leadership role in the same amount of time across both authorities, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Janet. And actually, I mean, the point that Councillor Jones and Linda made is a very good one, and could suggest that Cambridgeshire are getting a very good deal out of this. But a deal relies on both parties being happy, and we have yet to find that there's any contention from Peterborough's perspective. I think what was identified, and Janet certainly suggested it there, is that at that strategic level, there was an awful lot of duplication in attending meetings, and the practicalities of running at that level that would is impossible to say whether really you're there as Peterborough or Cambridgeshire, you're there as both. And so there is a certain amount of splitting, but there's a certain amount of recognition that they are just at that level strategically are going to be mutually beneficial for the same person to be sat at those occasions. So I hope that explains it a little bit more detail. And actually the document that I referred to, I think would be really helpful to circulate to all members. So if we could do that after the meeting, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Just to apologise, Chair, I'm afraid I couldn't get on, just could not get into the meeting. Anyway, then it just came. But anyway, just on the on the chief, GCP chief executive post, I think we were also told last year that this is not really a salary, that it's actually I'm not quite sure how to describe it actually, but that it's actually a package that she's not employed by the county council, so that it represents a sort of package, if you see what I mean, as opposed to a salary per se, because obviously it looks very high. I seem to recall us saying it looks very high as a salary, although it is a very big and important project, of course. And but nevertheless, I think that's what we were told. So I don't know whether Janet, if you wanted to, you're going to check that, and just just so that we can understand actually what
we will. And you're absolutely.
Thank you. And it's on a similar point and linked to Councillor Jones's point around the shared positions. There are occasions when we as Cambridgeshire technically hold the banner of employing these people. However, obviously they're shared. It's just that they have to sit within a certain framework, and with that's Cambridgeshire's, and in the GCP we offered obviously a similar setup in that we offered to host the employment, although not directly employed because the funding is external. Thank you. And no need to apologise, Councillor Harrison. These technical issues we face, we all faced at the start of the meeting with connections that seem to be dropping out, but I think they seem to be stabilising a bit now. So now I move on to Councillor. Sorry, I'm just getting my list again. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the Chief Executive of the Greater Cambridge Partnership issue. You've already asked the question I wanted to ask, was exactly how much does Cambridge County Council contribute to the money that this chief executive gets, and also what is the cost to this authority? Because if we, as has been explained, we host their employees, and if I remember rightly, in the dim, dark past, they occupied a rather large office and meeting rooms on the top floor of Shire Hall. All that comes at a cost. So if we're contributing and we have to take on those costs, I'd like to know exactly where we are on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson, and I think we that it sort of certainly has is appropriate. It's raised its head in this forum because the post sits and it's one that's been pointed out. But it probably raises other questions outside of the pay policy statement. But we can certainly look into those details, and I'm sure Janet and the team will be able to give details of that. Those questions, answer those questions, I should say. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chairman. The moment it's probably gone, but it goes back to Councillor Jones's point about the relative size of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And then as you said, I think we probably generally get a good deal out of it when we do 50-50, because it is largely based certainly on the way, for instance, we share membership of the Fire Authority, and it is based on the tax base, which shows that we're about 66% and Peterborough is about 33%. And so the makeup of authorities that on that ratio. We have 13 and Peterborough only have 4. So I suppose that on that basis, but whether it reflects the actual workload of the chief executive of either authority is probably not a 66-33, but that's just my input on that, Chair.
Thank you, and it's helpful context. I think that it is worth noting though that it's such a complicated web of issues, because equally the size is obviously, as we know, only one factor, but the need and requirement of the posts are very different in different areas, being a unitary authority. And we can see particularly in things like the people and communities, Peterborough have different roles and responsibility with housing, etc. So the demands are certainly different in those areas. So I think it is difficult to really extrapolate, what is a fair split. I think, again, it goes back to my principal kind of comment, which is as long as both parties feel that they're getting a fair deal and, we're not feeling that we're not getting our equal share of those strategic posts, then it seems to be working quite effectively. But it's important to keep that question being asked, because we may one day have to challenge that. Thank you. I have no other indications I think that's a legacy hand from Councillor Maguire. I have no other speakers on the pay policy statement. It is, well, as always, a huge credit to Lindsay and the team. It's a fantastic document, which I always find is very easy to read and understand and comprehend. And I know over the years we've made certain slight alterations and changes to it. But now I really think it's a document which the public can hopefully equally understand, which is really important in this piece of work. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that this is a statutory document that we have to produce. And so we really asked just to note, to make sure it's got the information we require and need in order to approve it. So members, I haven't heard any comments to the contrary that that's the case. So unless I have a hand indicating, I will just check my notes to make sure I'm not doing anything that I shouldn't. And on the pay policy, that we move to, is it to move to note this one? Michelle, could I just check with you? Oh, so
No,
yes, it's just to approve.
Approving it for council, yeah.
Thank you. I've just found my point. So yes, it's not to note, it is to approve and to recommend to full council. So I will take that as a unanimous approval unless I have an indication by show of hands. Thank you. So that's unanimously approved and recommended to full council. Thank you, members. So we move on to our next agenda item, which, sorry, Michelle, I don't need to go through a list of names that being consensually agreed.
Fine. It's fine.
So we move on to agenda item number 4, and this is Cambridgeshire County Council's People's Strategy. And again, can I invite the HR business partner, Lindsay Fulcher, to introduce this report? Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually going to pass this over to Janet, so you're not having to listen to me throughout the whole report here.
Thank you.
We're tag teaming this one, if that's okay. Thank you for that, Chairman. This report is to give members an update on the overview of progress that we've made during the last 12 months since we spoke to you around the people strategy. But we've also taken the opportunity this year to reflect some of the work that we've been doing as a result of the COVID pandemic, which has been quite varied and substantial in the sort of change of emphasis that we've had to adopt. So we thought this was a good opportunity to bring you up to speed on some of that work. So it is quite a long report, and I won't take you painstakingly through all of it, but just wanted to highlight some of the key points, if I may. Obviously, the COVID pandemic onset of that last year did throw us something of a curveball and put on hold some of the work that we were planning to do. I said there has been a lot some of these areas, in particular in aspects such as the wellbeing agenda. The other thing that I would say from this, the difficult situation that we have been in, there have inevitably been moments of opportunity for us, and I think without doubt what we're all finding within HR is that the ability to connect and engage with people that we have gained through this period has been really substantial, and you'll see some of that through some of the activity that we have undertaken during this year. So the move to Zoom, whilst it causes us all difficulties and challenges, Zoom and Teams, it has given us a platform to engage with our workforce in a way that we never could possibly have done before, which has been a really positive outcome for us. So we summarised where we are in terms of the people strategy, which was agreed by full council in May 2019, which feels like quite a long time ago now. We're already more than halfway through that people strategy, and we'll be in no time at all coming back to talk to you about the next one. But we've set out through our people strategy 5 themes around resourcing, employee engagement, wellbeing, skills development and behaviours, and the 5th one being reward and recognition. And the report sets out the progress over the last 12 months against each of those areas. So in terms of resourcing, at the bottom of page 2, we've set out how our action plan tasked us with having a much more comprehensive careers and jobs section for our website, which has been developed and is now live. And that really gives us an opportunity to showcase the council as an employer in a much better way than we were able to before. It provides us with a forum to publish our achievements. So, for example, when we have disability confidence status that we've been reaccredited for fairly recently, the ability to put that on that website and highlight that to potential members of staff, future members of staff, is really valuable to us. We've also been streamlining our recruitment processes, and there's a lot more to do on that, but we have started work on that this year and been doing that very much in collaboration with our Equality and Diversity Network. That network itself has grown in the past year from around about 35 members, I think, to well in excess of 100. So that's really galvanised the engagement of that group, and that's been really valuable to us to work with them on that. We have done work on a new recruitment training course for recruiting managers to support that process. And you'll see in 3.9 something that's very dear to Lindsay's heart. I know she's been very involved in it, in the National Kickstart Scheme, which has just been launched in September last year, which provides a new funding for a new scheme for job placements for 16 to 24-year-olds who are in receipt of universal credit and at risk of long-term unemployment. And as there was at the time of writing this, I think, a requirement for all scheme employers to be able to provide a minimum of 30 placements. That's actually recently gone because I think the government realised that not an awful lot of people were able to do that. But nonetheless, we're all already well down the road of doing that and liaising with lots of partners across the area to get that scheme up and running. And so we've had confirmation that our application is successful for that, and we'll be starting work on that, which is fantastic. So we'll be able to host those placements ourselves alongside colleagues in Peterborough and other partners. In terms of section 4, the skills development and behaviours, we've talked before, I think, about reviewing our current appraisal process and replacing that with a new scheme which is called Our Conversations. That goes live from the 1st of April this year. We were hoping to launch it last April, but given what happened, that had to go on hold because that was clearly not a priority at the time. But that's being relaunched with some e-learning. Whole new world now, everything is on e-learning, so that will go live in March ahead of the new scheme in April, and that provides a much more flexible model for us, much more on robust and regular meaningful conversations between a member of staff and their line manager, rather than a very structured annual appraisal process. So that launches shortly for us, alongside an updated set of values and behaviours, which will also be launched across both organisations, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. 4.4, just out of interest, says that we have 123 employees undertaking apprenticeships at the moment across a variety of professions. We've just recently had National Apprenticeship Week, which was very well supported, not in the way we would have liked this year, of course, because we normally do these things in person. It was more challenging, but that again has had quite a lot of publicity, and we've been very pleased with that. In section 5, we set out what our activity has been around wellbeing, and I would say this is probably one of the biggest areas for us over the last year, because wellbeing is always important, but never more so than in the sort of situation that we have been in, not least because, of course, almost all of our workforce had to work in a different way overnight, many of them from home in a way that they never have had to before. So we've done a lot of work around that. We have pulled together lots and lots of resources. Mental health training has been rolled out to and made available to all staff via a 2-hour webinar session. We've also rolled out supplementary training for managers to support their teams during these times, because it is incredibly challenging for people. We've launched a monthly wellbeing hour that started in September last year, which has gone down really well so far, I'm pleased to say. The first one was around wellbeing. This is all set out in section 5.4. Second one was on back care. We then ran one on run by Mind on Mind Calm Space. November, alcohol awareness in December, which was really well attended. They've all been really well attended, actually. Since then, we ran one actually in January around mental health awareness and in relation to race, what that means for people. And then only this week we ran one on sleep, the importance of good sleep, and how that affects your mental and physical well-being. So those have gone down very well. And as I say, we've been able to engage with people in a way we couldn't have ever done before. For instance, that first session on well-being, we had 170 people on a Zoom call. And they're all recorded, so if people aren't able to get to them at the time, they can watch them afterwards. So that has been very well received so far, and there is a commitment to continue that well into the future. We've also made IT equipment available for people who are working at home to make sure they've got a safe space to work at home as far as reasonably practicable. In terms of employee engagement, engagement has been really high. We've also reviewed our respect at work policy this year and really engaged with as many work focus groups as we can on that. CAMS 2020 is another factor for us all at the moment, of course, and we're in the midst of the consultation for the move to Alconbury at the moment. But I think that what we've really done during this last year is it significantly increased the corporate communication that's gone out. So in the midst of the for the first several months of the pandemic, there were daily bulletins for staff, literally every day of the week. That then went down to 2 days, and we still put out 2 staff bulletins a week, both of which will always have a wellbeing content and some hints and tips and reminders of where people can access more information. It's all held in one central place on our CAM website. We're also now doing monthly pulse surveys, which started at the back end of last year in December. So the first one was around wellbeing. The second one, which we just had the results back for and published earlier today, was around equality, diversity and inclusion. We will be launching a new one next week, which is around the way we work, asking people how they're coping with working at home, what they've learned over the last year, what's going well and what's not so well, and how they would like to work going forwards in terms of using the office spaces. We think probably in a more collaborative way than perhaps have in the past. And as 6.7, you'll perhaps all be aware that we have launched the Coveted Conversations, which is a weekly session that Gillian hosts every Wednesday afternoon for half an hour, which is an open invitation for up to 350 people to join, where Gillian talks about the latest information coming out, the epidemiology, and there is usually somebody coming along to talk about, one week it was Chris Mallion talking about the council's finances, another time John Lewis joined to talk to staff about the difficulties and challenges of homeschooling, which the end is on the horizon for that, thankfully, for most people. And then I think that probably covers most. Oh, and then reward and recognition was the final one. So we've mentioned that we're having a different approach to appraisal, and that will launch in April. We've reintroduced the council's long service awards, which had somehow not been operational in the last couple of years, but those have now been reintroduced, so that when people hit the long service target, they are awarded an extra day's leave for that year, and the £50 shopping voucher as a thank you and a recognition of that, and that was well received by people. I think that's probably all the things I wanted. There's a lot in there. So in terms of next steps, we have a new working ambition board which has been launched, which brings together members of staff across HR, property and IT to pick up on the learnings from the COVID-19 period and make sure that we do genuinely capture the benefits and the good things that we've achieved during that time and keep those going moving forwards. Wellbeing will continue to be an absolute priority for us over the next 12 months. We've got a really well established focus on that now, I think. Equally, set out there, we have a new head of learning and development who's joined us as a result of the repatriation from of services from LGSS. So help learning and development now sits within HR services. We have a new head of service, and that's giving us a really good focus on our learning and development officer management and leadership. We'll be looking at particularly over the next 12 months as well, so that we've got a much better offer around that. Yeah, so I think that probably is as much as I need to say. It feels like we've achieved an awful lot, and I think there's a lot of people very so I feel like we're in a good place to share with you what we've achieved during this year. I think, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. And notice Councillor Ambrose Smith giving a round of applause there, and absolutely I echo that. The report fills me with a little bit of sadness and disappointment, as well as pleasure. And the sadness and disappointment is just a reflection that we had such bold ambitions for the year ahead when this was agreed, and the circumstance has prevented some of those. But the hope and the pleasure that it hasn't gone away. It's paused in some projects, and it did continue with a number of projects we've seen. So I'm really pleased, and I think it's a fantastic document and something which we can really be proud of, that, you know, we've got an authority which treats its requirement to support its staff with the highest regard, and is absolutely held to account by these actions. So that's really positive. Councillor Matt Maguire, you're first on my list.
Chairman, it's by way of an apology. I don't suppose you missed me, but my connection dropped out about 10 minutes ago. I think Janet was on about paragraph 6 or section 6 at the time. So I've missed quite a lot, but that's a problem. You obviously didn't miss me, but just so you're aware that I had disappeared. But,
I did notice, and we did miss you. I noticed we also lost Councillor Ashwood for a short time,
right.
But thank you. I'm glad you both managed to join us, and hopefully you didn't.
I had to go right back to the beginning again, but I managed it. Anyway.
Great. I'm glad you're back with us. Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. And I dropped out too, but only, I think, momentarily. So a couple of issues, really. It's a very interesting report, and I can see that, you know, in a way you've had to kind of move, well, the goalposts have moved and you've had to move your goalpost because of that. And, you know, it's absolutely understandable and commendable indeed. In paragraph 3.9, you talk about the Kickstart scheme. I wasn't entirely clear, and it's probably my lack of having read about it. Was this a scheme that was funded by central government? And that was my first question. I mean, what funding came in when Cambridgeshire was allowed to join it? And then it later part of that paragraph, you talk about Peterborough having placements too. So was the scheme one in which you could put in placements in a range of places? I mean, I noticed that you've got quite a high level of apprenticeships anyway, and had that before. But can you say a little bit more about it for us? That's the first question I had. Do you want to respond to that, and then I'll ask my second one if I may?
I'm going to ask Lindsay. I think this is Lindsay's baby, so I'm sure she'll be happy to respond to that.
Yeah, more than happy to. Yeah, this scheme was a scheme that's come from the Chancellor's Coronavirus Recovery Plan. It is a scheme which fully funds part-time roles for 18-year-olds that are currently in receipt of universal credit. What it does is it fully funds these roles for 25 hours a week. And as well as getting the salary, we're also given the contribution towards national insurance and all the other on costs that we would face for these individuals. So there is no cost for us as an organisation other than obviously the accommodation and the IT costs and the indirect costs. And the aim of the scheme is to provide placements for people and for individuals, young people who ordinarily would struggle to find employment, and especially so during the COVID pandemic period. As Janet mentioned earlier during the report, initially when the scheme first came out, we had to guarantee number of placements, it was 30. However, this could be done by joining up with partners and forming a gateway organisation, with one organisation being the host, the gateway provider as such. So obviously with our links with Peterborough, we took the opportunity to link up with them, and Cambridgeshire itself became the gateway. And the idea was that we would provide 30 placements over the course of a 12-month period between us, and also inviting some of our partners. We have had a really good response from some of our partners. We've got partners looking to place people from the cultural sector, from fire service, from other small organisations, within the culture service, such as the Junction, the Junction Entertainment Centres, whole variety of different placements, which is brilliant. What we will do is we receive a nominal amount of funding to help facilitate those placements, but the individuals are then employed by the partner organisation. So we almost act as a bit of a broker, an in-between person, and we will get the money in for that, but the salary costs will then pass to the partner. We don't receive any funding in advance. We receive the funding as we organise the placements. So we've got 4 placements just within Cambridgeshire County Council about to start. We're just working through the details on those. And once we get these in, we will receive the funding for their posts from central government. And just one of the other things to say on the scheme is that we see it as a real benefit to the county. Part of our people strategy has always been to try and encourage the younger demographic, younger employees into the council, to see the council as an employment option, and perhaps more attractive than they would have thought quite nicely into our apprenticeship frameworks, where sometimes for these young people, actually even starting at an apprenticeship is quite a jump for them. And then we're also looking at what we can do with our care leavers, because we obviously, as the County Council, we have a lot of care leavers ourselves, and we're working with the job centres to try and encourage some of our own care leavers in the county to access this scheme through the job centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Linda, before I bring you on your next question, if I just interrupt just momentarily, if I may, and it was just to ask Lindsay, and I may have missed this, whether there was a communication around this piece of work from the council to, through our sort of press outlets, etc. So has there been one? And if not, I jolly well think we should have one, because I think it's an incredible story of positivity and really highlights the good work that Cambridgeshire are doing to support young people. So I don't know if you could answer the first question quickly and easily, and if not, we can perhaps take the second part of that outside of this meeting to arrange some kind of press release.
Yes, I'm happy to answer, Councillor. Yeah, we have done some communication, I think, to be honest, and I think once we've got confirmation that our first 4 people are placed, we could maybe use them as a bit of a case study and do some more external communications, definitely.
Thank you very much. That's we'll definitely take that up. Linda, you had another question.
Thank you. Yes, and I mean, I hope the district councils and the city are also partners in this scheme, because it sounds extremely worthwhile. The other question I had was about paragraph 312, which is about furlough, and you talked about the extent to which you could redeploy, and you talked about redeploying, in fact, hundreds of people, and you then go on to say that some were very much enjoyed this. I didn't know how many the some were, and whether it was a majority or not. And clearly for some people, for example, in highways, it was a massive kind of shift. At the same time as people, all over the place were grumbling because they couldn't get their roads fixed or whatever. So there was kind of pressure there. But kind of moving on from that, you then say the learning that you had was that people you can swiftly move and you can be flexible. And I can see that, but a people agile organisation, you need to learn the lessons quite carefully there, because I know in the health service, where there was an absolutely fundamental reason for people to be moved into COVID areas, there was a lot of kind of resistance and resentment and exhaustion from people who were doing jobs that weren't the kind of jobs they were used to doing, and they hadn't got the training for and they didn't feel competent about. So I'm hoping that you're being kind of very cautious in taking the lessons from the experience, and that when you're talking about agility, you're not talking about kind of, I'm sure you're not moving people around on chessboards.
Can I, rather than asking the officers to come back to that, because I think there's an awful lot of information in that question. I don't know how other members feel, but we naturally have meetings usually around August time. I think there's something else that we seem to do around that time that always appears, staffing appeals in my diary, or July, around that kind of time. And I wonder whether that sort of coincides with the change in national, guidance and hopefully getting back to some semblance of normality, whether we could undertake a bit of a more in-depth look at the impacts of COVID across the authority, answering Councillor Jones's questions, looking at some positives and some learning and the potential negatives that we've suffered and also benefited from. So that rather than trying to answer those, because as I said, that question is quite in depth with the potential, impacts and real impacts on staff as they've been redeployed, that we could have a more overarching report come to us that we could look at, because I think the learning is really important. Members, I've seen lots of nods for that, but it sounds like we perhaps take that piece of work away and bring that back to a future meeting. Janet. Thank you.
Yes, happy to do that. But can I just respond very briefly? Is that all right?
Of course, please do. Yeah.
Councillor Jones, just to reassure you that I absolutely agree with everything that you've just said. And one of the things, I think when we did the initial piece of work, none of us had any idea when we did this in March what was coming, obviously. When we asked people to put themselves forward for redeployment options, temporary redeployment, we did give people, there was a questionnaire that they had to fill out, which basically asked them a number of questions to get a sense of what their skill set was, so that we weren't trying to push people into square pegs into round holes, or push people well out of their comfort zone. Having said that, I think, there is always that you always learn from these things. And even though we tried very hard to make sure that we weren't doing that, there was still, I take your point about, there were some people in P&E who were taking, one day we're dealing with, potholes, and the next day we're dealing with very distressed people on the telephone. They would never have had to experience that before. So we did learn from that. I think what we want to do, and we can absolutely come back with a report, I think it's a good idea, is capture the good and realise what we've learned, that the way we were able to mobilise activity and across the organisation, I don't think any of us would ever have imagined could be done so effectively and so quickly. So we need to get the best of that without doing what you've just said and push people into an uncomfortable position. And hopefully we don't have to do this for a long time again anyway. But we do want, the benefit of the agile we'll try and capture without the downside. If that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I think I heard mention of the word apprenticeship, and I just wanted to be clear. Am I right in thinking that the 151 officer who we recently appointed was an ex-apprentice and has sort of come up the ladder through the county council, and sort of, I mean, everybody looks young to me, but I mean, he I didn't know whether he'd got the afternoons off from the headmaster or not, but nevertheless, if he wasn't an ex-apprentice and he had come up through the ranks, I think that really shows that we have an excellent scheme going, and great that somebody does do that. Can you clarify whether or not he was an apprentice?
Not quite an apprentice, but close. He was a graduate trainee.
Okay, so
he has come through our grow your own route, if you like. Yes, and we do still have a very active graduate trainee scheme running. In fact, we've just approved the funding for the next cohort to be engaged for September, October this year. So we take 4 graduate trainees each year, and we've had some really good success with the retention of those graduate trainees. So quite a few people do actually want to continue to work for us when they've got to the end of their 2 years. Tom's one of them. Yeah.
So they would join at, say, age 22 or something like
Correct.
that.
Yeah.
And well, I think there's a huge amount of credit for you in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. And I recently sat on the panel with the graduate trainees with Councillor Van der Ven, and got to meet them. And some of the questions they asked about working with members, I was worried about putting them off coming and scaring them away, but thankfully they seem to be still interested. So thank you. Councillor Maguire.
Just your comment then, Chairman, is I've obviously as Chairman of the Council done a few of those panels. I have to say it really is a worthwhile thing. And I'm glad they introduced that, because it gives any of our employees, but our graduate trainees as well, the exposure to members, which I still think is very important for those who may not normally have that exposure. It's a great thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jen, I haven't got any other speakers, but can I ask, or Lindsay, on the, so going to the end of the report, I'm just going to find the page number, sorry. The data which is presented at page 31 and 32, which is in the sort of pictorial and charts, particularly around the LGBT data, I noticed that if I take the two numbers together, or two percentages, around 55% of the authority either preferred not to say whether they were LGBTQ+, or have not disclosed their sexual orientation. Can I check, is that normal? Are we statistically in line with others, or is there a reason why we think that people are not disclosing or would have particularly prefer not to say?
It's something that we are absolutely wrestling with at the moment, isn't it, Lindsay? And we've been talking to our Equality and Diversity Action Group. We've had a very active Equality and Diversity Action Group, I'm pleased to say, that was galvanised last October. I think we started this. So we have a structure with EDAG, the Equality and Diversity Action Group. We've now got a working group that I chair that meets fortnightly. And that's one of the things that we have been trying to push. So before we ran the Ethnicity Pay Gap report, we put comms out to all staff to, in a bid to ask people to complete their data on the ERP employees system. And we explained why we need it, because if we don't have anything close to full data, then we don't have an accurate picture of the workforce, or things such as the ethnicity pay gap. We're running at about 80% across the board, I think, Lindsay, aren't we? Into 81% of people who have completed their data on ERP. That's not very different from any other organisation. I was on a webinar yesterday with that was run by Solace, and there were 3 other local authorities who were speaking on that webinar, and they were saying they're wrestling with the same thing. But what they did say to when I asked a direct question about this was that they felt it takes time to build the trust for people to be willing to share their information. And so we have got much more activity around equality, diversity and inclusion now, which is great. We've got some real good momentum going, but I think we have to continue to deliver on that, to deliver against the actions that have come out of our pulse survey, which you've just run, and then hopefully people will start to trust and see the value of giving us that information. Because that group did ask us, the Equality and Diversity Working Group said to me the other day, it's great that you've done the ethnicity pay gap. Will you run one for another protected characteristic next year, and then another one the year after? And my response really is, yes, we're happy to do it. But if we've only got 48% of the data, what's that actually going to really tell us? So yeah, it's a long answer, sorry, but it's something we're wrestling with. I'm really keen to try and find a solution to.
Thank you, and that's a really comprehensive answer, and I really appreciate that. I think it's I suspected it was probably a combination of that trust in the organisations you've correctly highlighted, which is what we can do something about, and a combination of none of your business, which is perfectly reasonable and justifiable. So that's one part that we just have to accept and equally acknowledge as an important factor. So. Thank you, and I don't have any. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hudson. I've just seen next to your hand.
Just on my thunder, Chair, that none of your business remark. I don't think these people should be pressured at all to give any personal information if they choose not to do so, because at the end of the day, it's of no interest and of anybody else or anybody else's business. And these people should not be pressured because they're a valued member of our workforce like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it is that striking that fine balance between making sure that that's just the case, that people feel like that, as opposed to feeling like they can't disclose because there is any element of mistrust. And the only reason it becomes business is because when we then want to do analysis to make sure that there is no suggestion that there is any different treatment within the organisation, if we don't have the data, as Janet just alluded to, it's really difficult to kind of make sure that's not the case and make sure that, or that we're taking proactive steps to ensure it's not the case. Thank you. I probably potentially could have opened a can of worms there, but I haven't had any other indication to speak. So we've been asked to note the strategy and obviously the accompanying data, which I believe we have and we've commented on. I do really look forward to the next year and hopefully that we'll be able to progress some of those elements of the strategy. Having said that, that absolutely doesn't take away from my earlier comment, which I still think we can hold our heads very high and be very proud of some of the achievements we've made in a really challenging year. So thank you again to you and the team for those. So members, I take it that we've noted that, and so we can move on to our next agenda item and our final agenda item, which is our pay gap reporting, agenda item number 5, and that is again in the capable hands of the HR business partner, Lindsay Vulture. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, one of the first things I just want to say about this is, we just talked about the data. We have to remember with pay gap reporting, we are legally obliged to report on the data as of the previous March. So it always seems very, very behind with the data when we report on this. So some of my figures that you'll see in here, especially when we're talking about the ethnicity, they're reflecting a 1 in 4, so about 75% return on the data, whereas we just talked of the 80%. So just wanted to let you know the reason being is this data is obviously as of March last year. We're bringing this paper to you today under our requirements, the Equality Act. We need to report on gender pay. One of the publications that you've received today is a copy of the published data that will appear once this information has been to full council. But with your endorsement and with your support that you provide every year, we go above and beyond our statutory requirements to present an action plan as well and progress against our action plan to look at how to reduce our pay gap. And also following the motion by full council back in the summer last year, we've made a commitment to report on our ethnicity pay gap as well. So for the first time this year, you'll see the ethnicity figures in there. If I could please take you to section 2 initially to look at the gender pay gap. And you'll see here that our mean, which is our average pay gap this year, is 7%, which is a decrease on the figure of 8% last year. And our median, our middle, is 9%, and that's the same as last year. So although we're only seeing a 1% decrease in our gender pay gap, that's a really, really positive sign. We've talked before at this committee about the fact that we've got such a large organisation with such a diversity of roles. We have many different pay scales, many different occupations and careers throughout the council, and therefore to see even a 1% decrease is a really, really positive step. So I think that's definitely something to be celebrated. Moving on to the ethnicity pay gap. One of the caveats I wanted to say with this is that this obviously is something that we're doing above and beyond the legislative requirements. Therefore, there isn't any national guidance on how to calculate this ethnicity pay gap. We've made the decision to calculate it in the same way we do our gender pay gap, using the same methodology. However, all councils, all other organisations will have different categories. They will have different ways of working out their salaries, their mean and their median salaries. And therefore, I just wanted to say that if and when this does become a national requirement, the chances are our method of calculating will differ. And therefore, the year-on-year figures may not be representative each year. Furthermore, as we said, we at the time of running this report, at the time of the data, we didn't hold data on 1 in 4 of the employees. So although we have got a fairly representative sample here, we do appreciate that some of the figures may be slightly skewed. So looking at our ethnicity data for this year, we have a mean pay gap of 2.5%. And a median, so our middle value, of minus 2.9%, which is in favour of those who disclose they're from a non-white ethnic minority background. So on the face of it, it's very pleasing. Even a 2.5% gap, when you compare that to a gender pay gap, it is a low figure, it is a low percentage, notwithstanding the limitations in data that I mentioned before. However, the idea and the ultimate aim is to have no gap. So we will continue to work on this to get ourselves down to a situation where we're hopefully on a 0% gap. And you'll see taking you to section 4, you'll see on the progress against this, most of the actions that are listed on the accompanying action plan you've got there are in relation to our gender pay gap, because obviously that's what we've been monitoring up to date now. We are looking at that action plan, and one of the things we've put in there as a priority for this year is what Janet will have just mentioned about trying to get an increase on the data that we hold. So what we can do is come back to you next year with much more data and therefore much more meaningful analysis of where the perhaps issues are or where the things are that we can improve to look at reducing that ethnicity pay gap. I think that's all I wanted to highlight with you. Reports, which hopefully you've had a chance to read, with the data that backs up some of what I'm saying here and some of the recommendations and the updates that we've got in the action plan. But that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I think it's interesting because previous years when we reported this, we've had one in particular significant change in our workforce. The CCS, we reported that had a particular impact on those numbers. Whereas we had a bit more stability this year. And as you correctly said, although it's 1%, 1% is still significant, and it's a really good indication that we are moving in the right direction. Had it been increased by 1%, I think it would be causing more concern. So that's really positive. What it does perhaps lead my mind to is that we still in the infancy of reporting this and the method of reporting, but going forward to start reporting on looking at year on year, rather than taking just the previous year as a comparable, so that we can start building a picture of direction of travel. Because thinking about what the coming years may mean for the local government or for Cambridgeshire would mean that we might see other significant changes in our workforce, which have impacts in those year on year. But as long as there is a trend date, I think that's probably what's more important. And I know I think that comment comes very much from Councillor Jones, who often refers to trend data and the importance of it at meetings that I've been at. So I obviously have listened because they are perhaps more important than. I'm slightly losing connection with people. I'll come back to you. Now, apologies, members. I don't know if I cut out completely or you can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you.
I can hear you now, Josh, but lost you.
Are we done, basically, anyway?
Okay, I think I appear to be getting people back slowly. Sorry if I lost you. Questions, members, please do jump in. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, sorry, it's just one point really. Last year in this committee, I raised the issue about women who were taking maternity leave or had career breaks for caring. The impact on them, on the return to the workplace of promotion and development opportunities. I wasn't quite sure if that work had been done. I was trying to kind of check on it in relation to the action plan, but I couldn't see clearly that it had been done or that there was any specific recommendations or action following from it. So I may have missed it, but could you help me with this?
Yes, I'm happy to answer this, Councillor Jones. We are looking into this. We did start a piece of work, to be totally honest with you, looking at career breaks to try and select a number of individuals that have been on career breaks so we could track their career throughout the council. We also spoke individually with some female members of staff, again, to track their career through the council, which was really useful and gave us some really vital information. To be honest with you, that obviously has been put on hold over the course of the last year, and the career breaks that we have within the council have been very few and far between this year because of obvious reasons, but that's something I can promise we'll give a priority to over the next year.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hopefully I'm back now. I haven't got any other indications from members to speak. So we are asked again, and I'm sorry, I'll just move to my notes, to approve the gender pay gap, and again to consider it or recommend it to full council. So I haven't had any members offering any points they wish to see altered in the reporting and or any comments to the contrary. So I will take that again as unanimously supported, unless I see a blue hand raised now. Thank you. And now quickly ending the meeting before any more connections are lost, including mine. And just to end on saying thank you very much to you all as always, and particularly to Janet and Lindsay, and obviously our Democratic Services for the reports. And hope you have all have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Josh. Bye.